Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Lewis McGlynn. I'm joined today by my guest, William Duguid. How are you, William?
I'm fine, thank you, Lewis. Nice to meet you online at last, and I hope you're well also.
First up tonight, our Ukraine update on day 470 of the Russian invasion. Volodymyr Zelensky has visited the Kherson region impacted by flooding after the destruction of the Nova Kakhovka Dam. In a post to Telegram, Ukraine's president said the main issues discussed during the visit were the operational situation in the region as a result of the disaster, evacuation of the population from potential flood zones, elimination of the emergency caused by the dam explosion, organisation of life support for the flooded areas. In an address yesterday evening, President Zelensky said it was impossible to predict how many people would die in Russian-occupied parts of Kherson due to the flooding. He also severely criticised the UN and the Red Cross, who he said were not helping the relief effort. About 230 square miles of the Kherson region today is under water, according to the regional governor Alexander Prokudin. He said that 68% of the flooded territory was on the Russian-occupied left bank of the Dnipro River. He said that the average level of flooding in the Kherson region was 5.61 metres and almost 2,000 people had left flooding territory as of this morning. 5 people have died due to the flooding after a destruction of the Kakhovka hydroelectric power station, according to the Russian-imposed mayor of occupied Nova Kakhovka, the nearest settlement to the dam. Russian media has claimed that over 14,000 houses were flooded and almost 4,300 people were evacuated in occupied Kherson, but the claims have not been independently verified. Volodymyr Litvinov, the head of the Bereslav district administration in Kherson region, reported that there is a risk of further flooding inland due to the rising level of the Inhulets River, which feeds into the Dnipro. The International Atomic Energy Agency has announced that it will strengthen its presence at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant amid concerns over water supplies for cooling the plant's reactors. The Kiev mayor Vitaly Klitschko has issued a new statement about the situation with shelters in Ukraine's capital, saying that the city's council will warn the owners of private premises with shelters that if they are not properly maintained or people are not admitted during an air raid, these premises may be seized from them. It follows the deaths last week of 3 people who were unable to get into a locked shelter and were then hit by falling debris from a Russian missile attack. South Africa's President, Cyril Ramaphosa, had a telephone call with his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, during which he briefed Putin on the forthcoming African leaders' peace mission to Russia and Ukraine, the South African presidency has said. Anders Rasmussen has said that a group of NATO countries may be willing to put troops on the ground in Ukraine if member states do not provide tangible security guarantees to Kiev. Current NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg has said the alliance must discuss options for giving Ukraine security assurances for the time after its war with Russia. Our top story tonight. In a debate today, the Scottish Parliament has further discussed the retained EU law revocation and reform bill following a vote on the 29th of November in 2022 calling for the bill to be withdrawn. A further vote in February of this year concluded that the Scottish Parliament should withhold consent for the bill and considers that no amendment to this bill can be viewed in isolation from the risks of the overall bill or will be sufficient in removing the dangers attached to it. The bill proposed by the UK government no longer aims to sunset EU laws and regulation, instead opting to enable their amendment with secondary legislation and the removal of the additional parliamentary scrutiny requirements that currently apply when modifying some types of EU-derived domestic secondary legislation. The bill has been criticised for a lack of transparency on exactly which pieces of legislation will be revoked or amended, as well as the risks it posed to animal welfare, workers' rights, consumer protection, and the environment. Constitution Secretary Angus Robertson, MSP, brought forth the motion to discuss the amendments, stating that the UK government amendments to the retained EU law bill, tabled on the House of Lords on the 10th of May, do nothing to alter the view expressed in the Scottish Parliament. He added that he felt the UK government was undermining devolution, as Scottish ministers were given less than 8 working hours to consider amendments to a bill with far-reaching and complex implications. According to Robertson, the UK government's decision to move forward with the bill showed a willingness to pass laws in devolved policy areas without the consent of the Scottish Government and Parliament. Scottish Greens Environment spokesperson Mark Ruskell, MSP, raised the danger to the environment as an issue in today's debate, stating that the UK government was cancelling action to protect our lungs, following a warning this morning from Scotland's environmental watchdog, Environmental Standards Scotland, that the bill would leave Scotland without any national programme on long-term air quality targets. After the debate had concluded, MSPs once again voted to withhold the Scottish Parliament's consent to the bill. Now, William, what are your thoughts on how the government has handled this bill?
How the Scottish government has handled it, or the UK government?
Start with the UK government, as they're the ones who seemingly are pushing this through, despite the Scottish government's protestations.
Right. Well, I think the new incarnation of the retained EU law bill is a slight improvement on its predecessor, which had a real cliff edge of, I think, up to 4,000 laws. I'm not even sure they've discovered quite how many laws are involved, which makes resolving the whole thing very difficult. But certainly that cliff edge, which would have come at the end of 2023 for all those laws, would have been, in my view, chaos. So it is a slight improvement. There are 600 laws which will go at the end of this year, and then they'll work until 2026 with the remainder. But I just don't see it as anything other than a horrifically complicated process. And so I would like to see a lot more work going into, if we are going to replace EU laws, replacing them in a sensible and controlled fashion. And there's no reason why we can't basically retain them in essence until we can put in the work to do that. So I wish the UK government had done that instead of just pushing ahead. No doubt with the support of the remaining Brexiteers who are still shouting loudly about how wonderful things are going to be, but it's not really the way to do business. In terms of the Scottish government, I think the Parliament is quite right to vote against giving consent to it. I think it will do no good whatsoever because the Sewell Convention, which says that the Scottish government has to give its consent, and that the UK Parliament will not normally legislate in devolved areas without it. I think that will just be they'll ride roughshod over it. It's a convention is a convention, and it can always be changed. We've found this out now, just the limitations of devolution, particularly since Brexit, which I think really was a game changer for the devolution settlement and should be concentrating the minds not just of independent supporters, but even of the parties and the folk that still support the idea of devolution. It was always a trap, but now it's a trap that has potentially no rules. The UK Parliament just overriding when it feels it has to. So the Scottish Parliament has done what it can, and we will see what happens next.
Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is reportedly set to raise issues on AI law and other topics, including trade and the war in Ukraine, with President Biden this evening. The White House has also said that the pair will likely discuss the situation in Northern Ireland. Sunak is seemingly prioritising economic matters going into the meeting, pushing for closer investment links and more resilient supply chains. In regards to AI law, the Prime Minister hopes to position Britain as a world leader in artificial intelligence and its regulation, despite experts questioning the UK's ability to impact global rulings on the issue from outside of the European Union, and the UK missing out on meetings between European and American regulators, such as the Tech and Trade Council. The bilateral trade deal previously discussed with former President Trump is no longer on the table, according to UK and US officials, with Sunak's official spokesperson stating that the UK was not currently seeking a free trade deal with the US. The Prime Minister and the President are expected to hold a joint press conference later this evening after the talks. William, what do you think a meeting like this means for the relationship between the UK and the United States?
Well, from Rishi Sunak's perspective, I think he sees it as the potential for resetting what would have been the special relationship in past years, which has suffered quite a few blows, to be fair. First of all, with Donald Trump being in power for 4 years rather, in the US, but also from our side of things with Boris Johnson, with Brexit, and with the general political turmoil that we saw for the whole of 2022. Add that to the mix, the fact that Joe Biden is not all that keen on the UK anyway. It would appear when he was here to talk about the Good Friday Agreement in April, he spent 4 days in Ireland and less than 1 day in the UK, perhaps indicating where his general sympathies and where he sees the future going, where all of that lies. So for Rishi Sunak, it's quite important that he gets something out of it, but I'm not sure what he's going to get, because as you said, he's certainly not going to get a trade deal out of it, and that was certainly part of the rationale for Brexit, the wonderful trade deals we would make, not necessarily in places all the way around the world like Australia and New Zealand, but in improved trade relations with the US. That ain't going to happen. There will be no deal. There might be specific targeted things, but to be honest, when you say specific and targeted, you're searching for words and coming up with a word salad. There has to be something concrete, and I don't see it coming. From Biden's perspective, I think he's going to be polite and he's going to say all the right things, but I really don't think that the UK is going to get very much out of it. In terms of the AI thing, I think the EU has already stolen a march on the UK, because it has already had talks and agreements have already been signed between the EU and the States. And we're coming to the party for the crumbs now. This is what Brexit did to us. And I think Rishi, for all his undoubted "Hi, I'm Rishi" charm, will shortly be finding that out.
Health boards across Scotland have hired an additional 800 nurses, midwives, and allied health professionals from overseas, aided by £8 million of funding announced in October last year. This came as part of a package of £600 million to support services throughout the winter period. The funding was announced with the aim to recruit 750 new staff, a target that has been exceeded as the result of intensive work by health boards, with 293 additional staff already in posts across the country and a further 507 expected to arrive at the end of the summer. In total, an additional 1,000 members of staff have been recruited from overseas in the last 18 months, bolstering the existing workforce and providing further resilience to the NHS. Commenting on the numbers, Health Secretary Michael Matheson said that these recruits bring with them a wealth of experience and expertise and will help to ensure everyone in Scotland has access to the right care in the right place at the right time. Adding, last October we set ambitious targets to recruit 750 additional nurses, midwives and allied professionals from overseas, and I am pleased that due to the hard work of health boards, we have exceeded this target. William, do you think this surge of new staff will help alleviate some of the pressure that the NHS has been under since the outbreak of COVID-19?
It may do, and certainly that's what it will have been devised with a view to doing. I'm glad they exceeded their target. Right now, in the last year, what was in the news earlier in the week was that annual spending on NHS temporary staff had hit a record high of £560 million. And this recruitment drive that goes on until the end of the summer will help, I think, to alleviate that. I think for the NHS to get fully back on its feet, we need to do a lot more. And very specifically, we need more funding, which, of course, is not necessarily within the gift of the Scottish Government to provide right now. However, the recruitment of the 800 in total and the beating of the target is perhaps a good riposte to Sandesh Gohani, who the Tory spokesperson for health, no doubt with his NHS lanyard on, but he was on Good Morning Scotland, so you could only hear him, trying to tell people that folks didn't want to come to work in the Scottish NHS because Scotland wasn't an attractive place to work and people didn't seem to want to do it. I thought that was a complete brass neck and very, very counterproductive to be so disparaging about the whole thing. And the Scottish Government can now turn around and say, look, we've hit our target. We've more than hit our target. The folks are here and they're going to be here in the next few months. And it's a positive news story. I'll bet you'll not be hearing that from the BBC, although they were only too happy to broadcast what Sandesh Gohani had to say.
So while this is like you say, a very positive story, would you say that it is almost just the first step, and to really make these positive changes that the NHS need, the onus would on the UK government to provide that additional funding?
Yes. And the slight problem with that is, of course, that there's the current drive within the English NHS to privatise. That's been the case ever since 2012, and that affects the funding settlement. That's one of the reasons that we need to think in terms of becoming independent as soon as possible, because it's independence that gives us the ability to create the money or to borrow the money or to do what we need to do to fund the NHS and the rest of the whole structure behind it properly. And I don't see how that happens under the current devolution settlement, with funding constraints as they are, and with a completely opposite view of how the NHS should operate, ruling in England and Wales.
The Court of Sessions has ruled today that some parts of Edinburgh City Council's plans to regulate short-term holiday lets were unlawful. The ruling comes following Scotland's largest crowd-funded legal challenge, where 4 landlord petitioners took the council to court last month. £300,000 was raised to fund the judicial review, with the petitioners arguing that the scheme went beyond the aims originally set out by the government to improve guest safety. Judge Lord Braid, who presided over the case, hearing arguments from both sides over the course of the 2A hearing, ruled that a rebuttal assumption against granting licences for secondary lets within tenements lets was unlawful. He also found that the lack of provision for temporary licences and the requirement for some hosts to supply coverings for floors went beyond the powers of the council. A statement issued by the petitioners following the publication of the judgment today said, "We have yet to fully digest the detail of the decision, but we hope that this will give common cause to both the Scottish Government and City of Edinburgh Council to seek a fresh approach that aims to collaborate and work with local operators of self-catering accommodation, recognising the many good things it brings to the economy and the people of Scotland." Ailey Key from the Tenants Union Living Rent Edinburgh said that the judge's decision demonstrated how a small group of people can use their money and power to weaponise the legal system to their advantage, adding that Edinburgh needs homes, not holiday lets. In coming down with support of short-term let operators, this decision seems to have forgotten that Edinburgh is in the midst of a housing crisis. Now, William, what are your thoughts on this ruling?
Well, I think it's a technical ruling that's basically saying that the proposals are creating contradictions with the existing law. So I don't think it's necessarily insoluble. Whether, of course, the landlords and petitioners are particularly interested in solving the problem properly is another matter. I am fairly uncomfortable with the crowdfunding of 300,000 that went into this to stand against what was really a democratic will that the proposal should go ahead. They ran a consultation, and 5,600 people took part, and 88% of them were broadly in favour of the proposals. And there is certainly a problem to be solved, and those people certainly wanted to see it solved. So I very much hope that the council will go back to the drawing board and perhaps work on proposals that don't breach the technical issues that Lord Braid managed to discover, and certainly that they do things that are within the powers of the council. And I hope that a satisfactory conclusion can be reached, because the present situation in the middle of a housing crisis for Edinburgh is unsustainable.
4 children and an adult have been injured in a knife attack in the town of Annecy in the French Alps. At least 3 victims are currently in critical condition in hospital, and UK Foreign Minister James Cleverly has said that a British national was among the children injured. At around 9:45 a.m. this morning, a man armed with a knife entered a children's playground near Lake Annecy and attacked a group of children, all aged about 3 years old, while they played. a security source and local official have reportedly told AFP. Witnesses have described the suspected attacker as running around in a frenzy, seemingly attacking people at random before he was stopped by the police at the banks of the lake. One witness, named as Nellie, told France Info Radio people were running, crying, panicking. It was horrible. Another witness told local public radio, France Bleu, that the attacker had seemed confused. National police are heading the investigation, with them originally stating that 6 children had been injured. Checks on the man who was arrested at the scene were ongoing, but he was unknown to French security services, a police source told AFP. Now, William, this is just a truly awful story.
Yes, it is. Yeah. And it's difficult to see what could have been done to prevent this happening. They're not looking at any apparent terrorist motive. They are looking at somebody who appears to have been homeless and isolated and presumably was suffering from mental health problems. That may say something about how we need to be looking for these issues within society more broadly. The far right in France seems to be seeing it as an immigration problem, because this is apparently a Syrian man who'd been granted refugee status in Sweden, but he wasn't known to the authorities, and he travelled perfectly legitimately to France as an EU refugee. And I really don't see how that line of argument is helpful here. It's just a horrible situation appearing in a place that I think was known for its calm and its breathtaking views, and is the last place you would have expected this sort of thing to happen. Sometimes bad things do just happen, and there may be things to learn from it, but it's not apparent that there will be. It's perfectly possible that this will just be an isolated thing. But you have to feel for the victims. Hopefully they'll be young enough not to remember too much about it in future years. But a horrific situation, and we can all picture ourselves in an idyllic holiday scene and think, that could happen. That could happen somewhere, particularly with the rise of pressures and mental illness in society, not just here, but obviously in Europe as well.
It's especially troubling that this really tragic situation, like you say, is almost already being weaponized by these certain right-wing groups and spokespeople to legitimize, in their eyes, their ongoing claims and targeted campaigns against immigration and against these foreign nationals entering the country, like you said, legally through the right channels. When reality is that, again, as you mentioned, the root causes are in lack of social services and lack of ability for these people to get the help they need.
The way forward, and this is a particular hobby horse of mine, because I think that the big story of the next 20 to 30 years is going to be large-scale migration from the parts of the earth that are steadily becoming uninhabitable to the parts of earth where people can just about hang on, and we all have to muck in together. And we really need, as a whole society, as a global society, to change our view of mass migration and immigration, because we are literally all in this together, all on this planet together, and we need to get along together, and we need to understand that some people are going to have to move about, and we should be working towards accommodating and integrating them and making the most of what we have with them, rather than going the other way. And I very much fear that we might want to go the other way, particularly since the right-wing tropes that we do here seem to be so attractive to enough people to make life very, very difficult. It could work out absolutely fine, and I may be just unusually and unnaturally fearful about it, but I am concerned about the next 20 to 30 years, seeing just what we've got when small numbers, relatively small numbers now, compared to what we're going to get, of immigrants are coming to Europe.
Donald Trump's lawyers were officially informed by federal prosecutors that the ex-president of the United States is a target of a criminal investigation looking into his retention of a national security materials at his Mar-a-Lago resort and obstruction of justice, according to two people briefed on the subject. The investigation is now nearing its conclusion following evidence being taken before a grand jury in Washington and another grand jury in Florida. The letter, formally alerting his lawyers, was sent days before their meeting with senior career official in the Deputy Attorney General's office and special counsel Jack Smith, who is leading the Mar-a-Lago documents case, on Monday, where they requested for the prosecutors not to charge Trump. When asked directly by a New York Times reporter, the former president had reportedly said he had not been personally informed by the Justice Department that he was a target. However, when asked if his legal team was informed, he hesitated and demurred. This comes following the subpoenas being issued to multiple aides who worked with Trump, compelling them to testify before the grand jury at the U.S. District Court in Miami, Florida. These witnesses included Taylor Budowich, a former Trump spokesperson, who confirmed that a statement drafted in early 2022 saying Trump had returned everything to the National Archives was never issued. With prosecutors on the case having supposedly obtained evidence of criminal misconduct occurring at Mar-a-Lago and deciding that any indictments should be charged in the Southern District of Florida, the location of the resort, rather than in Washington. The outcome of the investigation and what charges may be issued remains unclear. William, what are your thoughts on this case as it continues to develop?
I know very little about the vagaries of American justice and grand juries. It seems to me that there are two grand jury investigations going on. We knew about the one in Washington, which is certainly about obstruction of justice, but may or may not be about what Trump has been doing with national security documents. We didn't previously, I think, know about this one in Florida. And the reason possibly that it's in Florida is that that's deemed to be the place where the problems took place. And it may well be that Trump, when president, took the documents to Mar-a-Lago, and when he stopped being president, that was a big problem for the documents to be there. Whether he was sort of showing them to people or doing anything else that breached national security, we really don't know. And indeed, at this stage in the investigation, I suspect we shouldn't know. It's important that the grand jury is allowed to gather the evidence and to take a view on things without speculation running rife. Of course, it will be rubbished by Trump as just a witch hunt. And you always have the suspicion that through it all, he'll get away on some sort of technicality. Apparently, having national security documents in the wrong place is not a surprising thing for a president. Many previous presidents have done similar things on a rather smaller scale. But it does seem, I think we have this impression that Trump is somehow untouchable and that he'll inevitably be a leading candidate in the 2024 election. But this really does have the potential to bring him right down. Of course, we might also say, be careful what you wish for if he is brought down, because who's coming next? Is it Ron DeSantis? Is it somebody even further to the right? Is American politics so polarized now that whatever happens, the 2024 election is going to be a mess? And so all these questions remain. And in the meantime, we just sit here eating our popcorn, I suppose.
You mentioned earlier that obviously he's going to be a candidate. Do you think that this will affect the former president's campaign next year?
It should do if he's found guilty. Assuming he's not barred from standing by anything, but I really don't know how the law stands in that regard. But I think he is certainly set to become a candidate. He said he will be a candidate. And if he's allowed to run, he'll be a strong candidate because a lot of people still listen to what he's saying and cannot believe that he's done a thing wrong. And it is absurd because, in my view, he's the only president I can remember in my lifetime who was literally unfit to be president. There was nothing, to my mind, that was presidential about him. There have been several presidents with whom I would have disagreed hugely in a political sense, but I couldn't deny that they were presidential. Trump stands apart from that, and I regard him as an absolute menace and a danger should he be elected again in the current volatile world situation. But, we just have to wait and see, because he seems unusually able to survive crises like this. And we will just have to see whether the grand jury can come up with something that he really can't answer and can't get away with.
The First Minister has made a commitment today to consider calls for a ban on greyhound racing in Scotland following a request from the Green Party's animal welfare spokesperson Mark Ruskell MSP. Ruskell requested that First Minister Yousaf consider a phased ban, stating that no dog deserves to be forced into a gambling-led industry with an unacceptable risk of injury and death, citing statistics from a report by Greyhound Board Great Britain, stating that there have been over 2,000 deaths of dogs between 2018 and 2021. This request came on the same day that the formation of a new coalition of animal welfare organisations protesting against greyhound racing in Scotland was launched. Campaigners from various organisations, including Edinburgh Dog and Cat Home, League Against Cruel Sport, and Scotland Against Greyhound Racing, have all come together under the banner Unbound the Greyhound. Ruskell has also called for the closure of Scotland's last remaining racetrack, Thornton Greyhound Stadium, and has lodged a motion at the Scottish Parliament welcoming the formation of the coalition. Ruskell said that it is heartening to see so many people come together as one voice to demand a phase-out of greyhound racing in Scotland. We are motivated by the welfare of these beautiful creatures and desire to ensure they are cared for and protected, adding, I hope the growing number of weight in numbers and the interest of the First Minister signals to the industry that its days are numbered. William, how do you feel about this Unbound the Greyhound movement?
Well, I was very uninformed about the situation with greyhound racing. It's part of a pattern of increasing public awareness of cruelty in what people wouldn't previously have regarded as cruel sports. There are welfare issues with greyhounds, really from puppyhood to the grave in so many ways. And I'm staggered to hear your figure of 2,000 greyhound deaths between 2018 and 2021, particularly bearing in mind that that includes the COVID pandemic, so there wouldn't have been a lot of greyhound racing for a large proportion of that time. I also didn't know until I looked it up that the UK, the 4 countries of the UK, are 4 of only 10 countries in the world where greyhound racing happens. Because other countries have long ago, I guess, if it ever had root there, have wakened up to the cruelty that's involved in this. There's a parallel campaign, I believe, going on in Wales, where they've got 35,000 signatures, although I believe that a counter petition to keep greyhound racing, to say how wonderful it is, has had 10,000 signatures. So both of those will be debated in the Senate. I do think that the Scottish Unbound the Greyhound campaign will get its 25,000 signatures that it's looking for. And I wish them well, because I think it's all very well for us to have a range of wonderful and exciting things for us to enjoy in our lives, but it should not be at the expense of animals, and particularly animals who are bred for really no other purpose and who have a miserable time of it and great danger to themselves as a result.
Do you think there might be difficulty dislodging this institution, as some people might regard it as traditional in a way, despite the statistics and ongoing more and more information about just how terrible this industry really is to the dogs that are the basis for it?
I think there will always be resistance to changing things for the better. But as the open letter that Unbound the Greyhound produced today points out, greyhound racing is on its last legs. There is one stadium, unlicensed stadium left, and that was, as you said, the Thornton one. This is history moving. It's actually one of the good things about modern life is that we don't take for granted things that are actually cruel. I have so many views of the modern world that, in my advancing age, that make me think, oh my God, it's nothing like it was, and it's got a lot worse. This is an area where people are actually becoming more aware. And this is an area also where the greater transmission of information on the internet and elsewhere is actually helpful. So I think this is a campaign that will win and should win. It may not be absolutely easy because I'm sure there will be a counter movement just as there has been in Wales, but I believe it deserves to succeed and I think it will.
The University of St Andrews is now Scotland's top university and one of the top 4 universities in the UK, according to a new legal table published yesterday. The Complete University Guide 2024 ranks St Andrews only a few points behind Cambridge and Oxford, which take second and first place respectively, in its annual assessment of universities' teaching and researching strengths. St Andrews also came in at the top as the university with the best student satisfaction for the 5th year in a row. A total of 24 of the 27 assessed subjects at St Andrews were ranked in the top 10. The university is one of 3 that have made the Guide's top 30, with the University of Edinburgh placing 12th and Glasgow placing 26th. In response to the news, Juan Pablo Rodriguez, president of St Andrews Students' Association, said that consistency of excellency in the ever-changing world of higher education is a rare gem. However, St Andrews has shown that it is possible. Remaining number 1 in Scotland for another year is an incredible achievement. William, how do you feel about this recent rankings?
Well, St Andrews has been there or thereabouts in the UK university rankings for a number of years. I think it's been number 1 in a couple of years, dislodging both Oxford and Cambridge, to the extent that The Guardian, bless them, has now coined the term Stocksbridge for the 3 of them. I'm not sure how quite to take that terminology, but I think they've got themselves into an excellent groove, and hopefully they can continue to maintain that. It's great to see again in a time where people disparage Scottish education, and you do hear the Foghorn spokesman doing this, that we have actually a beacon of excellence and something that demonstrates beyond reasonable doubt that certainly our university sector is as strong as ever it was. And we may be too wee and we may be too poor. I don't think we are, but people will say it. But we're certainly not too stupid. So good luck, St Andrews. Keep it up. And, well, let's see if the others can get further up the table as well.
I think something that I thought was quite interesting to note was not only is it very highly ranked in terms of teaching and researching, but also that it was number 1 for student satisfaction. So that means that they are not sacrificing student well-being for academic achievement, and they have managed to find a balance where I think a lot of places can struggle in that regard.
Yes, I think that's right. And I think actually St Andrews has been quite good on the welfare of students in general for quite a number of years, because I think they had a buddy system for freshmen and fresh women. They had a buddy assigned to them from really quite an early date when other places weren't doing that. Oxford certainly wasn't doing that in any sort of organised fashion. So yeah, I mean, it's a good place to be. I always enjoy visiting St Andrews, and I've never even studied there. It's a good place to be and to study, and yeah, I'm not surprised that people enjoy the experience, and long may that continue.
The official 2023 programme for the Edinburgh Fringe Festival has been announced today, with a diverse selection of work including theatre, dance, comedy, music, circus, cabaret, exhibitions, events and more, fitting with the festival's tagline of "Fill Your Boots." The programme features work across 3,013 shows, with themes tackling topical issues such as the NHS, mental health, gender and gender identity, neurodiversity, race and racial identity, politics, class and climate action. Acts from across the globe are set to appear at this year's Fringe alongside the homegrown talent, with performers from 68 countries appearing in venues across Edinburgh. A handful of new shows have been added to the programme since May, including a Queer Folk's Tale session at the Scottish Storytelling Centre, Nassim, a play from Iranian playwright Nassim Soleimanpour, Sean and Darrow Flake It Till They Make It at the Traverse Theatre, and Lies All the Way Down, a new chamber musical at the Space UK. Famous faces at the Fringe this year include TV personality and actress Gail Porter, two-time Palme d'Or winner Ken Loach, comedian and actress Rosie Jones, Rebecca Johnson of Netflix's Glow, comedian Rose Matafeo, Anne Gregory of NPC's Parks and Recreation, and comedian Paul Sinha. Upon the launch of the 2023 programme, Shona McCarthy, Chief Executive of the Edinburgh Fringe Festival Society, said, "The ideas, originality and passion that performers bring to the Fringe stages every year is testament to the role that Edinburgh plays in celebrating and promoting their work to the world. The Fringe 23 programme is bursting with every kind of live performance, so whether theatre premieres are your thing, or the best of live comedy, street arts or circus, jump straight in and fill your boots with as much as you can." William, are you excited for this year's Fringe?
I'm very interested to see what it does. It's a number of years since I went to the Fringe. I haven't been since the COVID. I used to go for just a couple of days with my wife and look around some shows both at the Fringe and at the Book Festival, which was happening at the same time. It's clearly an exciting lineup. It'll be very interesting to see if they get the crowds back quite to the level they were pre-COVID. Last year, I think there were 2.2 million tickets sold, and the previous time in 2019 that there was a figure worth reporting, it was 3 million. So they've got some way to go. And yeah, it makes Edinburgh a very vibrant, exciting, but incredibly crowded place. So if you don't like crowds, it might be a time to not visit Edinburgh and leave it to the people that do. And of course, it does also reflect on the story we talked earlier about short-term lets and the issues going on with that. Although I do think that lets while you went away on holiday might not have been included in the proposals of the council. It's certainly a varied programme. I'd like to see a lot of variation and perhaps getting away from just the emphasis on comedy that there has been in previous years. And obviously, there needs to be a continuing look at working conditions for the people who are both performing and behind the scenes at the festival, because that has been an issue in the past. When I say the festival, I should have said the Fringe, because the Fringe is so much bigger than the festival. But certainly, there should be enough for everyone there. And yeah, I'd encourage anybody to check it out, either online or if you want a physical program. They have a map on the website that shows where you can get one. You can get one posted to you for £6.50, but you can pick one up in a number of locations. Locally here, it's Waterstones, and I think there would be Waterstones in other places than Perth that would be stocking the program. So take a look and plan yourself a visit and commute if you can. And yeah. Enjoy the summer, I think.
Well, that's just about us for this evening. Before I go to anything else, I'd like to thank you very much, William. You've been an amazing guest this evening. Thank you for providing insight in all our top stories.
I hope it was insight, but thank you very much. And nice to hear you reading the news so professionally as well.
Before I go, I just want to remind you that here at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. So, to everyone who has donated, and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a new target of adding 10,000 new subscribers to enable us to employ staff to make more programmes. Good night, and thank you for watching.